12 o'clock.
Yeah.
I'm gonna call the meeting of November 4th to order. I believe we might have it wrong, in terms of the clerk. Is it your turn, John, or is it Aaron's to do that?
Should be John, we're going in ABC order.
Okay, all right.
Excellent, thank you.
John's already done it a few times, but I don't
Well, I
think he
guess I can
minds.
take that. Good application, done a good job.
Thank you. So the next order of business is to approve the minutes of October 21st that Scott Bates was the clerk for. And I think there was a correction, which,
I got a minor correction. That need to be,
I sent it out to everyone this morning and I don't think there were any other changes besides Scott's amendment to his statement.
I move that we approve the minutes of October 21, 2024 for the MCI Concord advisory.
second, great. All those in favor, and I realize, can we do a multiple roll call thing for like being present and approving this? Or should we-
well, that's too innovative, Dan.
Yes. Well, I was impressed with Linda. She was so efficient. I'm
No,
trying-
I thought, yeah,
All right, so
sorry.
vote for, so I can do that, Mark? Or something?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so Mark,
Aye.
Aaron,
Present.
Here and I.
Scott,
Here and I.
Peter,
Present, approved.
thank you, Linda,
Here and I.
and Patrick, while you came in.
Here.
Here and I,
Here and I.
and then John,
Here and I.
Dan, here and I,
Emily is on the way.
and Emily,
Here and I.
thank you. All right, that's awesome.
Dan, can you turn up the audio in the room a little bit louder?
Yes,
Thank you.
I think that's everyone, just talk louder.
Okay, please talk louder.
You can go into Zoom and turn the microphone input, just dial that to the right a little bit.
You wanna come and
Yeah.
grab me?
and then we'll do a test. For
Make
look ahead of schedule.
Zoom.
Or audio settings.
Yeah. That's not
Okay.
All right, so Emily, we're just gonna have to talk louder and will
Okay.
you let us know if it doesn't work? or if we
Sounds
start
good.
the
Thank you.
page?
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not there.
No problem. Okay, third order of business is a debrief from the Concord Carlisle League of Women Voters, first Friday. Anyone care to share some observations or thoughts or?
Well, did everybody watch it?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll give a brief summary. The whole meeting lasted a little over an hour. There were a number of us sitting at the front table. Patrick and Dan were sitting at the co-chairs table to the stage right of the podium. Peter and I and who's Peter's, or who's my right? Blank.
Peter?
Oh, Mark was here, me,
Okay.
Peter, and then Emily was in the audience. And basically, we opened with a summary slide presentation that kind of provided the highlights on what is going on with regard to the committee charge and progress to date. And the entire presentation lasted about a half an hour. We took turns answering questions, so I kind of delivered the opening. Peter spoke to some of it. Mark spoke to some of it. We let each of the committee chairs kind of address kind of what they're working on in their committees. And so I think we covered a lot of ground in 30 minutes, and we had a full hour of Q&A, and there was no shortage of Q&A. And the feedback was really positive. I think people were appreciative of the time. They were comments about, wow, what a great committee this is. A lot of people who really know what they're talking about, experience, seem very committed to what's going on. And you know, the league is a very good audience for us. And I think that it was a really great event for us to do, because I think that is a communication channel we're gonna wanna take full advantage of. Because they are so credible in town and they work really hard to communicate, so. I felt it was really, it was a good time, very productive. Others,
No, I would echo that. I also want to say a big thank you to John, for leading us on that. It was a lot of preparation that went into it. I think the, way in which it was presented was quite thoughtful. And I don't think we had any, we will get back to you type answers. So I think we're able to kind of cover most of the, waterfront. So thank you, John, and thanks for everyone else that participated.
I agree.
I think one of the important, we really emphasized the idea that we want this committee to be as transparent and as engaged as possible in the community. It's been great, having, Shannon and Donna McIntosh helping out with the communication stuff. And we haven't had a chance to talk about it yet, with, town staff is gonna support us in all the administrative aspects in the absence of a consultant, right? We thought we would find our own legal consultant, haven't been able to do that quite yet. And the town basically stepped up and said, Carrie has said, this is a real priority for us. We have bandwidth to support the committee, so we will do that. So I think we're in a position to really kind of respond promptly to any questions people may have, but also we have this idea that we will gather all the questions that get asked. They'll find their way into an FAQ, so that if you ever, as a citizen, want to know what's going on, you should be able to go to the website, and that FAQ should answer every question that's been asked to date. So odds are that the FAQ and the website should be able to answer any questions you have about status, process, goals, etc.
And Alan, I appreciate your stepping in there, in terms of. Exactly.
There are some hard questions about wastewater treatment and exactly what's happening with that facility, what the impact that would have on the town's capacity, etc.
Okay, any other questions or comments, or we have the tape, so you don't really need this, but I did scribe. I think I got pretty much everyone's questions.
Shannon, do you need those questions from him, or do you feel you got them?
I also was tracking, Dan did send me a scan
Oh, I did.
of his notes, so I have those too, but yeah, I tried to track by sort of categories, and the forum did move at a little bit of a slower pace than the DCAM forum did, so I felt like I was able to capture what the main point or question was.
There's one thing I thought was interesting, I wasn't surprised by any of the questions, but bringing up the topic of MCI Concord as a fourth village center, I thought was different than anything I've heard.
And it was also kind of struck by a couple of people that had done some great work in the town, volunteer and otherwise, that sort of came up afterwards and talked about potentially helping to in different stages if it would be useful to us. Highly. So anyways, all right. The next item of business is discussing the updates from the DCAM coordination meeting. Which is the meeting that you guys may recall that I participate in, and Megan participates in, and Mark every other week. The big things that for me came out of it, I'm happy to go back and look at my notes in case I've got anything that Mark can bring it up, but apparently Commissioner Backey sat down with some folks in Acton, and they did they recorded an interview so that they could understand how this project might impact them and give them a chance to raise some questions. And so I believe that is or can be available to us if John and your group thinks it could be useful, but it sounded like it was a very good conversation and well received. So the other thing that came out of it was that we went through a list of things that DCAM absolutely had to do, and one of those was reaching out to their list was 10, their stakeholder list was about a tenth of what yours is. And that's okay, they shared that with us, and I believe I forwarded that to you. We are one of those groups, it's just by way of example, the MCI Advisory Board is one of those groups that they have to, by mandate of the regulation, have to reach out to, as is the select board and a couple of groups that are on our list. Oars was on there. And then I have been pressing them for, I think Scott originally brought it up, but the list of discovery studies and anticipated completion dates, still haven't seen it. I will say that Paul is now in Japan on a delayed honeymoon, if I got that correctly, so he's there until about the middle of November. But Abby and Taylor are both aware that we're looking for this. It's gonna be important to, in my mind, it's gonna be important to incorporate and include it in the RFP for the visioning group. So, that's it, and Megan might bring some other stuff up in her update, but those were the highlights that I remember. That I wanted to share.
Is there any status update on any of the ongoing work?
Not really, Lee. There was, the only thing that I did highlight was the environmental team has been hired. You know, it's a phase one, which in paper, but, so they are on board, and they reiterated their assurance to us that when we need the information, so when we have, and they understand our timeline, anticipated timeline, for bringing on both of the consultants, we should have the information. They said they would not be the holdup. So. And then we talked a little bit just about the League of Women Voters prep, and Abby came up to me afterwards and she was very excited about that meeting. How productive it was. So that's all I have. This, just so you know, so it's not, let me think about it. It is this coming Friday, right? That we have our next meeting with them.
Yeah.
So what I would say, in particular with the chairs, if there are issues that questions you'd like me to raise, if you can get them to me by Thursday, I will be sure to bring them up. If that makes sense to you.
Yeah, I guess I'd add this to the general conversation about the level of, you know, sort of integration that we can get. There's a lot of comfort, I think, on DCAM's part and our part with us leading the visioning process and taking a lead in that, and understanding that we should begin to identify when they're legislatively required to have things done so that we can get those into our plan and coordinate deliverables as best as possible to match up. So I've asked a couple of times now, they don't have those firm dates. It seems like it's interesting, and except for that first outreach hearing that they had a hard date, everything else is sort of, you know, it's 180 days before they issue the RFP, they must have created a report or something like that. So it's kind of right to left scheduled instead of left to right scheduled, so we don't know. So there's some flexibility in that, but I think as we develop our plan, you know, get our RFP and work our consultants into it, we can then begin to say, all right, this is the stage when it looks like we're gonna have some visioning done, or and make sure that those things work together so that the plans look good.
Good. The next item of business is an update from Megan.
Everybody, thanks. I don't have tons to say today. A couple of my things were said by others, but I wanted to just update that we don't have, we didn't receive any new information about the funding. So we're still anticipating that we will receive word from the Office of Economic Development with the contract details, and you know, all signs point to that direction, but we haven't gotten that, you know, letter in the mail yet. So as soon as we have information to share, we will do that right away. John mentioned that we had a positive conversation about town support. We want to be as helpful as possible and, you know, as we're prioritizing this project. And we're looking forward to, reviewing the work that this group put together for the draft RFP that was shared over the weekend. So my team hasn't had, some of us have, but not everyone has had the opportunity to really dive into it. And so we have a staff meeting Tuesday mornings after this, so we hope to spend some time talking about it tomorrow. And I'm not sure exactly what the timeline is regarding this group, but you know, whenever you're looking for us to, we can meet any timeline you have about getting full input back to you, so we can make sure we stay on track. Just
So-
weren't ready for today.
So from input from both, you want that now, but input from both town and DCAM would be completed by Friday the 22nd.
Great.
And if you can get it sooner, that's all about it.
Sure. So I would say that's it for me. I mean, I think I did attend most of the forum last week. I had to miss the presentation part. I'm gonna look through those slides. We're gonna put them online, but I thought the Q&A was great. There was a good attendance online. And I think getting the scope together and getting a consultant on board is really the task at hand. And we've made a lot of great progress, and I look forward to, you know, complementing that work with a staff perspective.
Just a question on staff input, Alan, would you have time to take a glance at the visioning piece of it, especially as it relates to the Route 2 and the.
He's the most ahead of anyone, I would say.
I think it's important that we make sure, you know, and I see your roles, responsibilities. I want to make sure staff and initiatives we have already are not redundant with things that you are identifying. And I think that's the feedback that we'll give you kind of collectively. You know, one of the examples I give is, for instance, you know, we have already have funds to have our engineering team work with Stantec, who is doing transportation townwide. And there's gonna be a focus on Rotary, so that's an opportunity, but where is it that this group focuses on, what is staff focusing on, just sort of not redundant, but obviously, you know, complementary. And so those are the sorts of things I'm sort of trying to get an understanding of, so that's, you know, Megan will give you the complete feedback.
Anyone have any questions for Megan or Alan?
Might it be helpful to have an interim, like Alan, if you already have feedback, I wonder if it's helpful to kind of not wait until the 22nd, if there's feedback available, not necessarily on the spot today, but like, in the interim, I think it would be helpful, so we can incorporate that as we go. Yeah, take it as it's generated.
Sure, we'll get it in before the 22nd. Sorry.
Just use track changes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we have the most recent document, so we'll go off that one that was sent this morning.
I even forgot. Speak from experience here, not the good.
All right,
So do we have time to go into that in more detail in today's meeting, or is this?
the RFP?
Yeah.
Or, sure, do you want to take a couple of minutes, because we are a little bit ahead of schedule.
Okay, I agree with Alan. I think that my comments were mostly about the transportation side. I think that, in the assemble and review documents, we should presume that this transportation study that Stantec is doing gets completed in time to be input to this. I think that should be one of the goals along there, and I think in section 1, where we're talking about the context and the goals. I personally think that, you know, the town study of local circulation is important, and maybe that even is the strategy that's being worked up by the Transportation Advisory Committee. I think there's a general conversation we can have at some point about how to leverage the expertise and the involvement of other sort of domain-specific committees like climate action, transportation, and others. Because we, you know, the question is sort of, are we doing that work, or are we gonna sort of ask them to give us analysis and input and then integrate that work? I think that's a key thing for how we take it, go forward. We ought to leverage the interest that is there.
Can I just ask a question about that?
Yeah.
John had, when he, I think his group, when they were looking at the stakeholders, they talked about consult versus inform. Does that relate to Mark's point in any way?
Sure.
So in terms of your visioning of what that consulting meant,
Right.
would that look like what you're describing?
Maybe, I'm thinking about it, you know, more in terms of the project plan that you've outlined, and saying if we need, let's say, a study done of local circulation needs and existing conditions, we should be able to say when we need that in order to fit into the visioning process, and ask the groups, be it staff or if it's a relevant committee, to provide us with that input at that time. In other words, you know, really push that task out, because, you know, while we have a lot of representation here, we don't have the baseline expertise on each and everything.
Right.
So, you know, just similar to Public Works Commission and the Public Works Department will eventually give us the core facts that we need to integrate into the overall plan around wastewater treatment and sewers. And the light board could be working on the electricity kinds of parameters. And so if we think about it that way, then I think it engages a lot of the community that's already engaged and wants to be engaged. So is that consulting, or is that actually giving them a piece of work to do?
I think a simple way to describe, you know, inform versus consult. Inform is kind of one way.
Yeah.
They'll be on our mailing list,
Mhm.
right? Consult is, there should be some kind of a conversation,
Right.
whatever form that takes.
So
So something like this would definitely fall under the consult category.
Right.
And that probably isn't gonna be the community outreach committee being the primary interlocutor there. It's gonna be, you know,
Yeah, so,
more.
And that's an important point. That's what I was trying to wrap my head around.
yeah, for example, one of the comments we have in the RFP is that we'd like to be able to collect the traffic information and all of the other facility data so that it could be rolled into MIPA umbrella permit to expedite the, you know, make our parcel more attractive for resale. So what language would we need to direct the transportation committee to include in their contract with Stantec to make sure that that information is being collected? That's the type of question that I want to make sure
Yeah.
we're, you know, throwing out there and having it be a two-way street.
Yeah, I think we're all sensitive to the idea, Alan's point about we're trying to avoid redundancy. It's a little bit, just as an outsider, it's a little bit hard for me to imagine. I'm thinking about Alan and Megan in particular, that, you know, we're gonna come in and make these requests for work. And as we just pointed out, sometimes it's committee, sometimes it's actually staff. And I'm just trying to figure out how do we do that in a way that doesn't become overly burdensome and is coordinated. And I don't know how that happens. Yeah.
Can I offer just to build on this, because this is the foundation, so we're, you know, on the same, you know, path. That comment is helpful because that is perspective that when we engage with Stantec, we didn't have this complete, you know, your perspective yet. So I think dovetailing into work that they need to do, core work with these specific inquiries or questions are important because they'll have value for the redevelopment. Two things. We have to understand funding. If you're asking for this, we need to figure out, well, what are the costs to add to the consulting work and what's the source of funding? So that's something you can inform and help. The other is with MassDOT, and I think this is where roles, responsibilities, you guys have this front-facing presence for the town as well as the region, right? They're looking at you. To get MassDOT at the table is no small feat. So there really is no advance with MassDOT until they're there. So we could have all the funding and resources ready to go, but if they're not present, we don't have a conversation. So you can help with your voice to get that presence, and that's really important. And then that allows our consultant to be effective and efficient. So that's the kind of dance I see with this group, which is sort of a representing the town's interest, not just the departments, but in a very public way, and transparent way. Because again, with MassDOT, this rotary discussion has been going on for decades. What's gonna make it fast track is not Stantec or our engineering division saying, hey, can you meet? Gonna be,
Yeah.
right,
The council, the select board, and leads governance.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
That's exactly, Emily has her hand up and, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's good, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Visibility.
Thank you. I had sent some minor comments to Shannon and Scott this morning on the RFP. One thing I wanted to talk about overall, as referenced in task 3.4, the topic of the ULI TAP comes up. And so I think in that context, attack embedded in this overall sort of approach to visioning, concept planning, et cetera, is repetitive. So I just wanted to understand, and I had reached out to Dan and Patrick over the weekend as well. I mean, it seems as though we've sort of quietly moved away from the TAP. We had ULI come in and present, and I'd like to just sort of understand or come to a conclusion, why or why not engage in a TAP. If I look at, you know, the RFP, I think tasks 1 through 4 really would be accomplished via a TAP. My guess is at a lower cost. I don't know that for sure. But it really brings together sort of a holistic approach from everything, right? Consultants, environmentalists, you know, private developers, right? So I don't need to rehash the whole purpose of the TAP, but I just feel like the topic's been brushed under the rug, and I'm not sure how we put some closure to it, and would like to be able to get back to ULI to share with them why aren't we interested.
Okay, I appreciate, I have thoughts, but I'd love to hear from the rest of the group first. Or anyone else?
Before we jump to that topic, can I just ask one question, Alan?
Yes,
So Alan, the Stantec study, is that, what was the goal of that? Is that meant to like provide input to the DOT process, or I just wasn't sure what the mission is there?
it's interesting, the evolution of this whole process, it's very sudden.
Yeah.
But Stantec was engaged to work with the town on planning transportation.
Mhm.
And so we've revisited their original scope of work with the following needs that were identified after the original contract. The Route 2 widening sort of reconfiguration initiative that MassDOT is taking the lead and announced, you know, just a few months ago.
Where is that?
It's for the entire quarter.
It's all in white.
Yeah, well, where they're looking at changing, making modifications to that route.
Okay.
So it's a high level, it's concept level right now. They also have flagged, they said over decades, reconfiguration of the rotary. And so we knew that this was gonna become an important aspect of the town connectivity corridors, all that. So we'd asked we have funds available for them to support us as we get into the technical reviews. We just don't have the in-house resource to take advantage of that. So while they're focusing on the town roadways, the Route 2 corridor, also the rotary is important, with a caveat that we're anticipating this discussion. So we just have an allowance, and I think we have to look at what is the allowance gonna give us based on where's it actually going? And then what does this task force would like to see in addition? And the good news is, we appreciate there's gonna be connection. So we knew this in advance, but it was just very high level right now, just making sure we had a team that could do the work. Stantec has the engineer who can do this. Have it relate to the rest of the Route 2 corridor, which is a no-brainer. And then also understand there may be some development evolution of just traffic patterns of this redevelopment is gonna be important, but we don't have enough to really say here. But this would be the back and forth I suggest we need to have.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if you were hoping that study would produce something that we would give to DOT and say, okay, here's your.
No, they're gonna be a primary, you know, they're in this planning level.
Yeah.
They don't even have their engineers engaged
I see,
yet.
okay,
And that's what we need to, when they get the engineers, then we're really talking, we gotta take advantage of the time is right. But we're gonna need, encouragement for them to say, we're gonna reprioritize, because they gotta look statewide.
Yeah.
Right?
thank you.
Peter?
You know, just to sort of add on to Aaron's questions about the traffic study, I mean, we sort of know conceptually that we need to have access and egress on the comm, so where that should be and the impact on that. And we would like to see whether it would be permissible to have some type of access on the Route 2, so we don't overwhelm Winthrop Street.
Mhm.
So those are the types of questions that, you know, we'd like them to take a look at.
And it may get more creative than that.
That would be
Yeah.
great, you know, that. You know, flying saucer flyover that we're gonna come up with for 2072 is gonna be awesome. All right, so let's,
Sorry, I had a question for Alan. Do we have a sense of, the timing for Mass DOT as they consider what they may do with the, roundabout? Is it, I know they've now delayed it, so to speak, to take into account what's going to happen at MCI Concord potentially. But is there a target timeframe by which they would like to move from kind of concept to engineering, and which way does it go? You anticipate that they are waiting to get input on what happens to the redevelopment, or should we be kind of looking at to them as they have a strong hypothesis for how the rotary might be redeveloped or reconfigured, so that we should then incorporate into our process?
Most importantly, it was decades out for the last 6 months or so. It wasn't even on a 10-year plan.
Got it.
Within the last 6 months, and I don't know specifically how it was actually reconfigured to be within a 10-year window. So that's significant. But what it isn't is on a 5-year window, or, you know, so that's where we, I think collectively have to say, you know, MassDOT's just a piece of a much bigger puzzle, but they're gonna need to understand and be informed statewide that this is a priority. Concord alone is probably not gonna be able to make the case, but this opportunity is very real. And so that's where I think we need to start pushing a little bit on, you know, sort of the political will and, you know, make it of interest, so they do sit down and say, this is a 5-year window, not a
I know,
10-year.
I can help with that. I chaired the Fitchburg Line Working Group, and we've pulled together and have a list of every representative in every community along the Route 2 corridor, and had representatives from them, and we would meet on occasion to discuss things like getting the commuter rail updated, and we got like $280 million reinvested in the Fitchburg line. So this group is there, and they haven't met in a while, but everyone along the Fitchburg line wants the rotary solved. And I think it's, you know, it'd be a no-brainer to get them to pressure their representatives to move this forward, so.
And that would be exactly the kind of role that this group, and in the presence you have, you know, public, you know, Concord Public Works can't get that same juice.
Yeah, so, well, that's one of the tasks that we called out, and I know Elizabeth couldn't be here today, but Elizabeth started talking with Alan to get an idea of where we are, you know, so that we've kind of got you know, we're all pushing on the same, you know, leverage point. And the select board obviously is really interested in stepping up, so those of you that followed our discussion, we were arguing for, you know, more ARPA funding going directly towards the Stantec transportation study, because we're thinking this is important. I keep on thinking that, you know, critical is what's the design of how you get from one side of Route 2 to the other side, like how does the Concordian cross the road, or why? Would be.
It's a good, we're all thanks for shaking.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
But I mean, you know, if you look at what the TAC is saying, we'd like to be able to walk, we'd like to be able to bike. You know, I live on the Nurseck Hill. My son used to go and walk into the state police barracks and ask them to push the button that would
Mhm.
activate that traffic light so that he could ride his bicycle into West Concord. And on the way back, he was SOL because there was no way to tell him, hey, I'm here and I'd like to cross back. So that's the kind of real obstacle that we have to local circulation.
This also sounds like something where Simon can help us.
Yes. It's one of his, so we're taking on that to try to figure out that exact topic, which is how do we get DOT to the table? Emily's had her hand up. Are you still trying to get our attention?
I think she's
She
waiting
wants
for
to
the
go back to Cat.
Oh,
But before we do, Scotty, is your point to this discussion?
I was just wondering, we have this visioning consultant coming on board, and their efforts are gonna be through 25. And they're gonna wanna know egress, ingress. I mean, it doesn't work unless you know how the whole program can work.
Right.
If they're putting together sort of a visioning programming for ingress, egress, and Route 2 and Winter Street, Palm Mountain and all that. How can they put something on paper if we're not even sure what's gonna be the results of?
Well, I think what they can do, it's my opinion, is they can take a couple of different scenarios. There's only so many access points, short of Peter's spaceship. There's only, limited number. And so I think that's what we'll have to do.
Okay.
But it's a great question, and it's, that and wastewater is kind of like,
Yeah.
And isn't it really about trying to figure out what we think is most advantageous for the community?
yes.
And then try and put the impetus behind eventually getting to that point whenever it eventually is.
And because in some respects, if it's possible, we can create a fourth village center, that's a big placemaking kind of, in my mind. It's gonna have a lot of impact on how that thing gets.
Exactly.
Right,
Thank you.
so.
Interrupt Emily, she was trying to.
Well, Emily, sorry, thank you for your patience.
No worries.
Peter, I think you were gonna say?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was a bit of a conundrum with the ULI TAP was how do we effectively use that to incorporate the broad swath of community input that we're seeking. And I couldn't really figure out how a 2-day event would bring enough of the community involvement that we were looking for. So that was my concern with it, but we wrote it in such a way that that we could include it if it was something that the community wanted to do, but that was my main concern with that approach.
Okay.
I like what you was telling us about how the tap would work. It felt like they had the ability to bring together a pretty diverse group of people who really know what they're talking about, which is not necessarily what the consultant would do, right? The consultant has one stable of experts. ULI feels like they bring a broader set of people together. And I'm not sure what the timing might have been, but if I look at the timing on this RFP, it's way out there before we really get into any visioning. I wonder whether we should kind of think about doing both, where ULI would come in and act on a much faster timeline to get us something that might be the 80% answer, right? Or at least give us some directional indication as to where people really stand and what the possibilities are. And that becomes a primary input to what our consultant does in terms of going much deeper.
Yeah, so I can address that around timing. I think when ULI came in to see us, it was in October, and we would sort of get the application done, and if things were moving well, it would be sort of December, January when ULI would engage. So, a month has passed. So, I don't know if we're sort of past that point, but I think your perspective is spot on. Where like this is sort of the main foundation. What the TAP we would produce would be, handled to sort of the final set of, consultants, planners, et cetera, that we work with. But so I think if we want to make the timing work, we would need to engage ULI today. I mean, certainly the RFP does an excellent job of targeting what our goals are, which is a large part of sort of the ULI application process.
I was gonna say, like, I agree that the ULI process is really appealing, like, as an architect, we have these things called charrettes. I think people would know what that is. It's like a really quick, like, burst of energy to like really focus on an issue, and it sounds like that's really what the TAP process is. I, in my mind, after we went through this whole RFP process, was thinking like, maybe there's an opportunity for ULI later in the process, that we would, you know, come together around some series of options or scenarios that might come about, and then we may want to get ULI to focus on that in a more specific way rather than the broad question. I think that was talked about when the ULI representatives came in. They said, you know, sometimes we focus on a big question, sometimes we focus on a much more specific question. And just given the timing of everything we're trying to get done, maybe it made sense to have that be a, you know, potentially even a follow-on piece to this kind of first couple of tasks in the RFP.
So we are asking for 3 vision scenarios from this consultant, so they could have the opportunity to be part of that review of those different scenarios too.
Yeah, I have, well, I'm sorry, did anyone else have any?
Sorry.
So I want to pick up on both of those points, because it's actually something I wrote down. I think the potential value for ULI could be almost as a guest critic, as you alluded to. And I think that can be very powerful, and have them come in and react to some ideas that have been generated. I actually did some homework, Emily, out of respect for you. I went online, I checked out, I said it, you know, I tried to make it, I needed John's tool, but as broad a question as possible, trying to get people's reaction and experience and reviews, almost like the Google reviews. And I spent a fair amount of time looking at one who was in West LA. And I think it was a 45-minute YouTube thing. It was a final presentation in it, and it really, and granted, and I also looked on a Southborough, but that's a relatively small sampling. But be that as it may, it kind of reinforced some of the concerns I have. That was very good at, they kind of reacted to in this case, it was a VA hospital that was trying to create a new village center possibility out of this particular location. And they did an excellent job of sort of placemaking and taking that and expanding on the idea. I think that the concern that I have, which some people have alluded to, is we have one chance to make a first impression. And if we come out of the box and we say, here are 3 great ideas, it's going to be really hard to walk that back. And it's going to be, also, I'm worried, given the good work that John did with his group, that people are like, wait a minute, I thought we were all going to have this time to sort of weigh in and give our input. And so that makes me uncomfortable. And so that's probably, those are my 2 biggest reservations.
Dan, can you just, sorry, I'm not following you on your second point about the timing for people to weigh in.
Well, there's a limited, because it is a charrette, there's only going to be a limited amount of opportunity for community outreach and input on that process. So it's going to be a group of professionals coming in and saying, here's some great ideas for Concord in this particular property. And I think we're gonna, knowing Concord, as I think we all do, I think there's gonna be a lot, and you know, there's 2 pages of questions just in the League of Women Voters and ideas. And I feel like people are gonna feel like, how'd that happen? How did we get to these ideas so quickly without me getting to weigh in? So that's what I'm concerned.
I can understand that perspective.
Yeah. So you're saying you want a longer process that allows more time for people to engage, maybe in different ways, but if we come up with the answer too quickly, it's like, whoa, wait a second.
And then a month later, you're bringing on a consultant who's opening up to the public for input. So
Right.
Yeah, so part of this, John, is probably covered by the work that I did in working in institutional settings. And so they're like these ships, and I'm probably a little bit more like you. It's kind of like, here's a great idea, let's go. And what I found in those environments is it's not that simple. There's a lot they take a really long time to get to a moment where they're like, okay, this is a good idea. And so, and if you try to compress it or shortcut it, it just creates, and those are environments, quite candidly, where they're pretty much all going in the same direction, right? Wellesley College, Emerson Hospital, whatever, they kind of know where they gotta get to. This in the town, I'm not quite sure that's what we're dealing with. And so that, I think you're successfully designing something to mine that information. But I'm just worried about short circuit. Okay, so that's 2 cents.
That's a fair point.
Thanks. So and so Emily, I think the fact that it was incorporated into the RFP is out of an acknowledgement that there is a place and time for it and out of respect for the energy that you brought to that. And so I think it may be clumsily incorporated into it. And so I would welcome a way to do that better, especially in light of Aaron's suggestion or as a possibility. And I don't know how people, but I'd love to have them in that group at a moment when we're like, all right, here's 3, 4, 5 ideas.
So,
Where are our blind spots?
before we let the ULI moment pass, so to speak, is there, and I've never worked with them before, so maybe some of the folks that know them better in the room could help. I mean, is there a way that you can scope the request for a tap that kind of actually creates some options for then the solution space to be defined? Because I think the risk to what you kind of articulated, Dan, while open and very inclusive, is that it is, putting an end date on it can also be, it's way out there. And so is there, I think it's worth debating if there is an elegant way to have a tap up front that kind of gives you the left and the right boundaries and maybe one option or 3 options in the middle that goes from like, I don't know, industrial on one end to dense residential on the other. And then you've got models, from A to F and then in between at a very conceptual level. It's just an idea. Maybe that's clunky, maybe that's a bad idea, but I didn't know, because it's 2 days, is there something to that then actually allows not only the public, but also this group to start to, orient the discussion towards.
I have an answer for that, but I'm gonna let Scott respond.
So I've participated in ULI taps and like Emily, I'm a huge believer in them, and I strongly think it would have been a great thing for our community and our town. But unfortunately, I think the timing is we're up against it. This would, I feel like the game has started, so we've been good for preseason. And I want to use them in some capacity, but if you bring them on board now, and by the time you engage them, they'll be end of December, January. Our visionary consultant, we're hiring with money that we are counting on them because of their professionalism and they're broad and they're bringing more expertise than just 2 days. So if you come together with the TAP and they produce scenarios, and those scenarios differ from the scenarios that our visionary persons, then the perception and the optics from the town and the community are like, what are you doing? You got 2 different teams here, providing 2 different things. I'd rather wait for our professional team to come on board to vet it and have time with the community and time with all the research and all that, than just a 2-day. I wanted the 2-day, I wanted the 2-day 2 or 3 months ago, but it just, we're up against it right now in time. That's my, I'm sorry I'm not trying to kill you.
No,
This idea, but.
Lee, and then Peter.
So what if the tap happens after our primary RFP consultant is already engaged in the weeds and understands the project in general? And then they're a participant in the ULI.
That's why we put in the
process.
Yeah,
So why are you saying you don't want it in the RFP?
No, we put it in there just to have the options for incorporating them, but if you bring the people at ULI are gonna be a lot of the same people that you're hiring for the visionary plan, a lot of the same consultants. So that, you know, they're all the same types of people that you're hiring for the vision, they just come together for those 2 days and they put together a report. You're hiring, it's like hiring another, what?
It's redundant.
It's redundant.
Yeah.
I mean, it's redundant. And you're putting conflicts up. They're coming in and telling you something and you've picked this one consultant with this team, this broad team of different disciplines to come in and help you. And then all of a sudden you're throwing in a group for 2 days to stir things up and maybe come up with different things. I just think it's just not gonna work.
So
That's
Peter,
my personal opinion.
Yeah, just if we were going to use them to critique the top, 3 to 5 recommendations, that would come in task 3.4. Present the final 3 final vision and scenario land options to the Town of Concord Select Board, MCI Advisory Board, DCAM. Maybe right before that, we do bring them in and do a critique of the top.
I agree with that stuff.
right, well, does anyone else have any comments or do we, is there clarity about how we're gonna move forward with this?
I think what you're saying is we're gonna wait on ULI. Move ahead with the RFP, and at some point in the future, we'll consider whether there's an opportunity to bring the ULI on a more limited basis to help evaluate
I
options.
mean, that would be great to have them, all these experts, like have a peer review of those 3 scenarios. In addition to DCAM and all of us, I think it'd be fantastic.
So, good.
So if we're doing the RFP, we just drop the sentence where it talks about ULI from. From, yeah,
3.4.
2.4, and then we insert a new section 3.4 before the current 3.4, which is ULI cap critique of the top scenarios.
I guess I would say, I think the ULI process is really helpful. I don't actually know yet what question we would ask them. Like, I think we need to go through the RFP process with this consultant and get to maybe through task 2 or whatever. And say, okay, is the big question that we want them to evaluate these scenarios, or is it another question we want them to think about? Okay, how do we really make a new town center? Or is it like maybe there are a variety of things we would ask ULI. So I don't know if we strike that section from the RFP entirely and we use it as our prerogative to include when we choose to answer whatever questions we may want to have.
Yeah, Aaron, I'm sort of with Aaron in that. I think it's hard to sort of define how we might use them today. Like, I appreciate that they would be referenced in the RFP, but I don't want to box ULI into a certain, task. And we may find we don't need them, right? I mean, I think it is all going to depend on the cadence of the community outreach, what the consultants come up with. So there may not be an opportunity, but so long as that doesn't preclude, if they're not mentioned in the RFP, I assume that will not preclude us from working with them should we deem it relevant.
Yeah, it would end up being an add-on to the contract because the consultant's gonna have to make more time to mesh their process with the ULI process when we bring them in. So maybe we have it as a possible add-on.
You can do it as an alternate.
Yeah, as an alternate, yeah.
I mean, we could expand the language into 3.4 to go from beyond just idea generation to, scenario evaluation or something like that, to leave the possibility that it's either earlier in the process when ideas are being generated or later in the process when we're trying to sort of choose between alternatives or integrate those ideas.
A couple of things, just from this discussion. First of all, thank you, everybody. It was a great discussion, and I think we definitely made some good progress on that. I think it might be helpful for us, maybe I'm speaking more for myself, at some point soon, I think it might be really good for us just to sit in a room with a whiteboard and say, here's what I've been thinking about, what about you? Because I suspect there's a lot of ideas floating around this table. And I think just to have an opportunity to voice them, to vent, I think would be good. So that's, I'd like to throw that out as a suggestion in the near future. Certainly before we start going too far down the RFP process or hiring the consultant. The other thing is, somebody really smart said this to me recently. Concord is incredibly consensus driven and interested in wanting to hear a lot of voices. And it's also because of that, and maybe at least in part, and because of the complexity of this project, there's a bunch of opportunities for inefficiency. And so at some point, whether it's through your suggestion, Aaron, it might be very good to have some professionals come in and help us sort of drive this thing forward a little bit or narrow down some things. So I think that's probably worth just acknowledging too. So, if there's no further conversation on that, I wanna, I know I'm now, this happens, we get like all sorts of time in there.
Then we do something.
Then we do something.
And then we're behind.
Right, so the next conversation is about goals definition, and I believe I'm gonna hand that over to Patrick.
Yeah, and I think we can probably make up some time here. It's largely building on what I think Dan just articulated in terms of. I think, taking off of our advisor hats for a moment and probably having an opportunity to work through how we are, like, how each of us and then collectively are envisioning some outcomes. So effectively mining the advisory board for a few things. I would say one, starting with criteria for success. DCAN has been very clear on kind of their 3 criteria. I think in our charge, there alludes to some criteria for success. So probably Dan and I thought it would be worth hearing from this group how we might think about defining criteria for success. For example, whether that's economic impact, housing impact, climate impact, incorporating town resident priorities, etc. That I think would be an important bucket. Do you think that against those defined criteria, maybe on a whiteboard, maybe some thoughts in advance, thinking through what are different visions for success against those criteria? And it probably would have to be done in some sort of working discussion, but I think we really haven't, as a group, gotten into any content, so to speak, as to what might be our individual and collective views as to what the site ultimately might become. And then I'm sure there are other categories, but timing would be a third one. Mark mentioned before kind of left to right planning or right to left planning. I think that right to left planning, I'm thinking through working backwards from when we might expect major milestones, whether it's breaking ground, site completion. There are some that are already up there. John took League of Women Voters through it on Friday. I think those are good to have out there. We should, I think, revisit those, debate those, and see if there are any others, or and certainly interim ones that we think that are going to be important. So those are kind of the 3 major categories. Again, criteria for success, kind of a vision against each of those criteria, and then thinking about timing and major milestones. It's November, probably be good for us to at least have had a rich conversation on that in advance of formally engaging a consultant, so that when they say, well, what do you all think? We've, had the chance to be the dust as a group. We pause there, see if, I know that's quite conceptual, if that makes sense. Yeah, let me pause there if there's any questions or comments.
It's funny, I was going through the Envision Concord stuff, that we prepared to brief all you guys, and if you look at the process that we followed there. The first step was to do some broad vision. Second step was to develop a set of community criteria. Again, so we would measure those different visions. So a similar kind of approach, I agree with you. We should have a point of view before we actually celebrate first. We have no idea. Right, yeah.
It both feels, I think, a little bit late, but if we're being honest with ourselves, I think that we've learned a lot over the last several months. And so it's I think it's never too late, especially since we didn't do it early on, and maybe that was wise, or maybe we're just late, but in any case, I think before we get the consultant on board, I would see that as a worthwhile effort.
Maybe one tactical place to start is just understanding what the criteria are that we would use to evaluate proposals that come in to do this work. In the first place, that's gonna be a subset of those criteria, and accomplishing that selection is clearly one of the goals.
Scott?
Regarding that, Mark, criteria for selection, that was not included in the RFP. We can certainly incorporate criteria for selection in the RFP if you want. We can put together sort of how we're going to judge these, and maybe that's something we can do. And maybe, I don't know, if people could send Peter and myself, ideas, like how, key things you want to see in, like to evaluate this. Because a lot of RFPs we get in our business, they list out the criteria for selection, what they're looking for, and it's really helpful.
Thanks, Alan.
It's really helpful, just, it narrows the focus of the proposal.
Okay.
So we've all said that alignment with the long range vision for the town is, is valuable. So just let me read a little bit from the summary here about community criteria. Community values specific to Concord were identified as being important to all planning decisions, regardless of planning approach. These are the community criteria. It is intended that these criteria will be applied to planning goals and decision making to ensure that the recommendations in the plan and in future implementation actions are aligned with these community values. And they are, each has a short paragraph. I'll read the short paragraphs. History and character, livability and values, mobility/accessibility, environmental sustainability, and fiscal sustainability. We might use the long-range plans criteria as a starting point and decide if we want to kind of prioritize them differently, expand on them. Maybe things have changed since it's put together. Maybe the new criteria we would like to add, but maybe this is a good starting point for us.
Yeah, I would be agree with that.
I have a question, John. When you did that process, one of the things that I've experienced with goal setting, working with large organizations and stuff, was getting everybody on this, getting a common language, so that when you say minimal fiscal impacts, what is it? You're not saying that. What does that mean to you? It clearly means something to you. You have a lot of experience with that. And just for the benefit of everyone else around the room, if we had the opportunity to say that, well, this means this to me. And somebody brought up one, I don't know if it was you, Peter, or somebody brought up the concern about level of service, which I hadn't really used that language in my, we all very fortunate live in Concord, which is a well-managed town, and it runs pretty smoothly. And that level of service that we've all become very accustomed to could potentially be impacted by this project. I think it was you, Peter, that said it. So how do we, what does that mean? So that's what I'm hoping, because I know I don't have any clue what others are. It's not well said, but I'm sure I have an idea of what people think of it. It would be really good to have that shared. So, sorry.
So it's always dangerous when we say, this, we may save some time in the conversation. But whenever I say, oh, wow, we have a lot of time left.
Well, you just, no, but you just, I was thinking how elegant you just sort of dovetailed that part of your time.
Well,
here.
so can we go to the next item?
Yeah.
Because I hadn't thought of this explicitly before this conversation, but I think it makes a lot of sense. A ton of time went into the long-range plan to identifying a lot of the core values of the community and a lot of the things we're hoping to accomplish together, right? So rather than risking reinventing the wheel, we have this all here. And what I put together for today is I basically created a packet of information that I will email to everybody. It's called Advisory Board Primer on MCI Concord Bridge to 2030. And in this, I have kind of a summary memo that talks about some of the key themes that came out of the work. I have it's a 13-page executive summary of the plan itself. And then I also included, that I think it's interesting, a series of 6 letters that we sent to the Concord Journal for publication from the committee, explaining what we were doing. And because the report itself is not something you want to read, I think this really hits all the highlights. And if we're gonna prioritize Patrick's point around criteria, goals, et cetera, we should all be familiar with this. And thank you. Rather than my trying to walk everyone through it today, this is a pretty concise summary of the whole thing. If we could distribute this to the committee, you know, we can all get familiar and tackle this in the future.
That's great, John. Thank you so much for that. And what I'm hoping is that there's a whole bunch of other committees that you're going to be interfacing with that just like you can do, and I'm sure the primer took a while to do. But the fact is that you can help us navigate through that. I don't know how long, it was years, right? A couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and that's what concerns me. I don't wanna reinvent the wheel. I really want that person or people. I'm saying this for us, not just for me, that they can sort of lead us through that and say, this is what you need to be focused on. That's.
By the way, that's the point of the long-range plan. It's meant to be the overarching kind of expression of the community's priorities for the coming 10 years, right? So
I would just add on to that, to the extent this effort may vary from what this says, we better have a darn good reason why. If it is.
John, that's from 2020.
2018, I believe, July 30th, 2018.
It's a classic 12-year plan.
It takes us out, according to DCAM's timeline, it takes us out to the beginning of construction for our parcel.
You knew that too. Thank you. Any questions for John or additional comments on that?
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're still on. Do you wanna continue on your conversation and also the subcommittee thing, or do you want me to do that? I'm just feeling a little.
Sorry, I'm looking at the agenda.
It's subcommittee reports, but if you were, I just wasn't sure you were done with your conversation.
I'm done with my conversation. I want to pick up on one comment, that Scott made around RFP, criteria. Yeah, I mean, like one thing that, as I look at the dates that's coming up quickly, right? And I just lost it here, but in here, where is it? Information session, December 14th.
Yeah.
That's coming quickly,
Yeah.
so just think, I presume is that where we would invite interested parties to come and ask questions?
That's
Our
what
paper already be out.
the RFP is already out and they're coming and then they're asking questions like this.
Based on, right,
But the criteria for selection is, what we typically see is, as your team work together, as your collective team of consultants work together in the past, what relevant sites have you done recently that are similar to this MCI Concord property? Those are the kind of
Tell us about it.
selection input, your detailed project approach would be a criteria. Your fee will be a criteria, that kind of stuff.
makes total sense. I guess what I'm asking is December 14th, I would expect that interested parties would come with fairly detailed questions at that point. You know, what is the budget, like, so,
Yeah, they're gonna come with a lot of questions and there'll be their sub-consultants too. It's gonna be a big group and they're gonna, so they're gonna come with a lot of questions. They've already received the RFPs by then, so.
Yeah.
So they're gonna have questions about the RFP, they're gonna they're gonna get a site tour, so they're gonna have their questions about, they're gonna have a lot of questions that we're gonna need about existing conditions, boundaries, is this part, what is the actual boundary? They're gonna have a lot of questions about the rover and the true and MDOT and stamp tax reports and things like that, so we have to be prepared, like you guys were prepared for the meeting last week.
Yeah, and the next item there, RFP questions too, is that read to mean, so typically at a vendor meeting like that, they're allowed to come in and then submit questions after for some period of time, and then we set a deadline where we have to respond to those questions in a
Yes.
packet that then gets
In a package.
redistributed to everybody.
Exactly.
So are we saying January 2 is the day that we sent out all those responses, or is the last day that they can submit the question? So there's some date after that that we have between 2 and 14 that we have to answer all those.
Yeah, and if that's too tight, then we can bring it back in December.
Okay.
Just through some dates.
So the one point that we need to make sure that goes to Department of Corrections is that we would like to have a tour for the consultants on the 14th.
So just really quickly, that's come up, you know, we're on government legal affairs, we're doing that. So I actually wrote to Jeff Quick today to ask him, anticipating that we have a couple of access needs that we may want to do to try to understand where, you know, what's the ask, what's the process and for that kind of thing. And of course, we have this community interest in that. So we'll, as soon as we have that contact with, you know.
and maybe just thinking with it, given that we're only gonna have 2 or 3 advisory board meetings before the December 14th, maybe having on the agenda just preparation for that, like the planning and preparation for that in advance.
Yep.
Would be great.
Need to get clarity on, how many participants and who's gonna lead that
Yes.
process too. Elizabeth, you have your hand up?
I do. So, what, has to happen at this point is if the scope of work is, you know, everybody's kind of set with the scope of work, you know, some minor tweaks here and there. This does need to go to our procurement officer because to Scott's point in the question, this is, you know, this is somewhat of a hybrid type of procurement process. It's following the, you know, the RFP process, but you're going off this, you know, the state contract, but I do think if it is being called an RFP, that it does need to include in it the evaluation criteria and other standard RFP components. So, I think at this point, this needs to go to our procurement officer, for her to, you know, input, and this may be something that, the, you know, land use subcommittee or even the full board needs to, you know, specifically spelling out what that, evaluation criteria is, if it needs to be written into the RFP.
I think, it's okay. Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. Yes, I certainly needs to go to procurement. I was gonna take that on as part of staff input, so you don't have to kind of go to different offices. So we'll take that and give it back to you with the fully baked, and there might be adjustments to the dates that you have. That happens to me sometimes when I, you know, spec it out, and I'm in the middle of a couple right now, so we will give you something back that works for us.
Okay, awesome, great. We're gonna get, I'm assuming everybody's gonna give Peter or myself comments on the LSP. We're gonna add the selection criteria, things like that, add some different things, but when should we be sending it? We should probably be sending it off to you, Megan, for distribution pretty soon, like I would think.
Yes, because you haven't gotten the full comments from this group.
No,
So should
We've
we?
got- We've got comments from our land use committee. but
Yeah,
we've not
okay.
had it from the full committee yet.
Probably enough to share a draft at this point, I would think, right? To get, I would recommend sharing at this point and getting DCAMs and the town
Yeah.
staff input because.
We can look again.
Well, because we're gonna take another cut at
Yeah,
this and
okay.
send it back
In the
out
interest of
before
time.
it's-
Yeah, that's right, you can go.
We can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so Scott, I think you were asking, when do we want to send it?
Send it to where,
Like, issue it.
oh, we have it all in here. The
Yeah.
dates are in here.
And then do we do the select board review more?
No.
Do you wanna, implement some of those last changes that came in this morning before we send it
Yeah,
out to
and
town
That's
staff?
so
Yeah, then you can send it to me and I'll work with Megan to get it to,
the changes that were sent to me were,
there were ones from Emily and then I sent out, an email to the full board. John had some comments, I think in a track changes,
Okay.
document.
so let me send you a final version.
Yeah.
And, I think we're gonna hear from Elise Woodward. It would be nice to have, and I think within the next day or so, I think it'd be great to have her feedback.
So I'll wait for Elise. And then I'll
And so
send,
maybe the goal is before Friday.
but Megan's still sending it out, or should we wait?
I feel like we should wait for it to be in
Let
a.
me finish, Megan, I'll give it to you in a couple of days.
So Thursday, I think, is sort of the deadline because of the holiday. We've got to get the agenda out and documents out by the end of Thursday. For next
Do
week.
that.
And procurement with advertising, the RFP and all that, that's something that Megan,
That's something we'll take care of. Yeah,
So in a couple days, you'll send a version
Yes.
that we can fully vet through staff.
Hopefully Wednesday.
Okay, and then we'll get comments back to you as soon as we can,
Great, excellent.
with the latest being the 22nd, but no, we need to go to them before. Because on your next meeting, you'll look at another version that has town staff comments and all comments from advisory board members.
Yes.
So our next land use meeting is a week from tomorrow.
Yeah.
And your staff meetings are on Tuesday?
We have a specific MCI meeting every other Tuesday after this, but we can, of course, prioritize them. So sorry, your next land use meeting is when?
the 12th.
So, yeah,
Okay, see what I can do.
that would be great, thank you.
And then,
Couple holidays during there.
and then our next full board meeting is on the 18th, which theoretically we could be close to saying, yeah, this is good.
Yeah, that would be.
Right. So, are there, do you wanna walk us through?
I mean, I think unless there are any comments, John, on community engagement or land use, I feel like we've hit both those committees pretty hard today.
I've got just one item, I guess, for community outreach. We've been trying to get this initial communication out to our stakeholder list. Previously, we've shared a draft of that letter. There was some pushback from one of our committees. I've refashioned it as a more general introduction of the MCI Concord Advisory Board. And Shannon has done a lot of work to get the email addresses for everybody who's gonna receive this. This is not meant to be the last and final communication to anybody. This is just to say, hey, we're here, you are on our radar, we're acknowledging that you're a stakeholder here, here's how you can reach us. So, I brought 5 copies, if you wanna take a quick look at it, that's great.
Is this what was in the packet today?
I sent one out that's slightly different than this on Friday, and then this is the one that came in this morning from
Okay.
John.
So this is the latest and greatest. What I hope we can do is basically kind of approve this for distribution. And but Shannon's not gonna send it out like right after the meeting, so let's say that if you have any comments on it, please let her know in the next 24 hours, and then we'll send it out after that.
So I've read it before on email, I'll make a motion to approve for distribution with any minor revisions that are sent to Shannon.
Super.
Second. Need it.
Yeah.
Oh, roll call, Mark.
Aye.
Yeah, you guys are ahead of me. Erin, Scott. Peter,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Lee, John, Dan, Okay, thank you.
Emily?
Thank you, thank you. Oh, Emily, sorry,
Hi.
thank you. Sorry, Scott.
I had a question about the RFP for the community outreach. What is the status of that and the timing of that?
The short answer is, the person that we had in mind, we've not been able to pin down.
You have, you're gonna go directly to that
We were
person?
going to, we had one person in mind, it was gonna be a relatively small engagement, you know, probably below the threshold by which you would have to go through the procurement
Oh, okay,
process,
great.
right? We couldn't find that, the person kind of evaporated. She would have been awesome, she would have been, I think she was an apparition much. So she's gone. In the meantime, last week I had a terrific call with Megan and Shannon and Donna, communications head for the town. And they basically made clear they can provide most of the support that we need. So between now and the engagement of this consultant, we're just gonna do it on our own.
I think we may want to revise the RFP a little bit. to-
Yeah, because we talked about.
We talked about a liaison.
We talked about it.
So that, there's some language in the comments that I included in the track
Yeah.
changes that may be helpful.
Awesome. If, Lee, is there anything from, on the legal governance you want to share?
We had some comments on the letter, but that's probably moved at this point.
Yeah, so we were talking about the idea of following up. Looking at our communications stakeholders list where legal and government affairs is in the lead, we're gonna follow up directly with specific communications to those groups. It overlaps very heavily with the 10 groups that DCAM is mandated to talk to anyway. And we, you know, I think there's a couple more on the list, but that's what we were thinking of, and so we were trying to figure out how to do that and begin that outreach. Cause those are groups that generally fall into the consulted rather than informed, and the idea was try to make sure that this communication, let them know that if in general they just wanna sort of track the information flow that's out there, definitely sign up in those ways, but they're gonna hear from us separately to establish an actual relationship.
And by the way, because communication is important, I'm gonna take 2 more minutes. First, this initial stakeholder list is just the initial stakeholder list, right? We're gonna put something onto our website where people can sign up to be on our distribution list. I think what we'll do is we'll put all those people in there, and then others, anyone who wants can sign up. And as we said, you know, inform versus consult. If an organization, so for example, I bumped into a school committee member last week, and she said, you know, we're a huge stakeholder here, because if there are 1,000 kids coming to Concord, like, we need to be ready for them. So I think that the school committee is someone that we will go out and talk to, okay? Second important point, the community outreach committee is not the sole channel to all stakeholders, right? We have no claim on any stakeholders. Our role is to kind of facilitate a process and ensure that there are supporting materials so that we're all kind of singing from the same kingdom, right? So in that sense, we will create materials like we did that presentation for last week. If your committee has a meeting and you want to share a presentation, it's all yours. If you need us to help produce some additional materials, we can do that, right? But the community outreach committee is not imagining itself as the primary, you know, connection to any outside groups to this committee. So I don't want any of the other committees to worry that we're gonna be really like protective of these relationships, right? So if there are concerns, or if we can, we're really just, like I said, kind of, we're here to help, right? I think that's our role, and when there are, you know, just in terms of ensuring a regular cadence of communication, that's what we'll do, right? But that's never gonna replace a lot of these more in-depth conversations that will happen between different subcommittees and certain stakeholders.
I appreciate you clarifying that. You know, just an observation, it feels like, when I think about the work of the legal and governance, it's gonna come in really strong at the back end of this, when we're doing the zoning, that's gonna be much more predictable and very demanding. I think there's this piece in the front end where it's very hard to predict. There are going to be, as John and as you guys have already identified, the need for conversations, but we don't know when those are gonna happen. And so, I'm just observing, that would drive me crazy personally, but I just, you know, having you guys available to do that is, I think, huge and important. So,
I'm sorry, I need to ask a clarifying question. So am I gonna send this letter to everyone that's on the stakeholders list, those ones included.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, and you guys will follow up as you
Yeah, we'll
would
follow
like
up
to.
directly with those groups to establish that.
The letter says that you may hear in the future from any one of
Great.
us.
Just wanted to be sure.
Yeah. John, you're gonna have, I think I heard you say you were avoiding original sin by having a phrase on things, and if you're another stakeholder and you'd like to be involved, please just send us your information.
I believe so, yeah. But also, when we get our website up, which I hope will be in a couple of weeks, basically, we're taking the site that is embedded in the Washington website right now, we're gonna create what they call a microsite, which will have its own domain, MCIConcord.org. That will have a prominent box at the top that says, sign up to be on our communications list.
Thank you.
Because again, we have one line in our row of 104 stakeholders that says, residents and citizens.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know who all those people are, but if they want to sign up, they'll get all of our stuff.
All right, any other comments before I go to public? No? And are there any comments from the public? Questions, comments? Right. See them. Oh, this one, Allison Ailey. Allison?
Hi, yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Here, I'll put on my video. I put it in the chat. In when John was talking about the criteria, the community criteria, I believe earlier, I'm the West Concord Advisory Committee observer of you guys. That's why I show up. I believe Mark mentioned, I don't know, a month and a half ago that let's see, the Warner's Pond Task Force had to supplement the criteria in Envision Concord for their process. And I know that Envision Concord, the community criteria in Envision Concord are awesome, but there's some additional community criteria that appeared in the West Concord master plan that's old, but they may still apply. And I would encourage you to consider whether they do, just because this location is closer to West Concord. So that community criteria may be relevant.
And Allison, if you could direct those to us, that would be awesome, or direct us to those.
Okay, I will do that. I was trying to look through. It's not as organized in the master plan, but I can do that. I can send those to you.
I'll pull up the document that the Warner's Pond Task Force is using, because we did start with Envision Concord and read through it and looked at the watershed management plan and found that there were some things that have sort of evolved a bit, you know. I think climate resilience is one of the ones that's a little bit newer, but I don't remember what they all were, but we developed a specific criteria list for proposals for what to do about Warner's Pond, and then the plan there is to evaluate the proposals that are under development against those criteria, and I would suggest a similar process for this.
Great.
Okay, anyone else online? Seeing any? Right, I would entertain a motion.
Second.
Okay,
Lois and
yeah.